Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Lou Adducci to talk about micro communities and micro influencers. I guess we'll call them as that. So, Lou, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me.
So, before we get started into this topic, which I am actually really excited to talk about, can you explain and share your superhero origin story? That is to say, how did you get started working with nonprofits?
Yeah, I actually started out in nonprofit arts about 24 years ago. I was an ambitious theater student who wanted to do all things theater, and I ended up working in nonprofit arts. I did pretty much everything you could imagine in that industry. I was a production assistant. I was a scenic carpenter. I was a stagehand. I was a security guard. I sold tickets. And eventually I ended up in arts education, and that was inspiring and wonderful. And I felt fulfilled, but I wanted to do something else. I'll be honest, I wanted to make a little bit more money. So I decided to move into the tech industry. And also at that time, we had a 2-year-old son. So I wanted to do something more for him, but I didn't want to lose this life of service. I always believed in giving back to the community. Theater to me was, it's storytelling. It shares stories of our lives, and I thought it was a very powerful way to connect with, with each other and community. But I wanted to maintain that, and so I got excited because there was this opportunity to connect one of my favorite hobbies with peer-to-peer fundraising for my local children's hospital here in Colorado. It's a program through Children's Miracle Network hospitals called Extra Life. And really, it inspires people to play games and raise funds for one of 170 Children's Miracle Network hospitals in North America. And so I fell in love with this program and I became a volunteer. I was a fundraiser. I raised thousands of dollars for my local hospital. And eventually they were like, hey, why don't you come hang out with us? And they gave me a job to help run the program. And eventually I became director of community experience there and absolutely loved, the work that I got to do there. But then I wanted to expand out. I wanted to take the learnings I had from helping build community with gamers and then push it into as many other nonprofits as I possibly could. So I did start to work with a fundraising platform called Tiltify, and Tiltify helps raise funds for thousands of nonprofits online. They have digital tools specific to live streaming, and I've got to manage those communities as well and help drive that product in some pretty cool areas. And so for the last 7 years or so, I've been engaging communities, engaging creators or what we're calling micro influencers today in very meaningful ways to connect them to causes that they care about and to become advocates and to raise significant amounts of money for nonprofits over that period of time.
And I'm going to do my very best, because we're both gamers, not to talk about gaming as much as possible. Because I started off with the original Pong back in the day. That's how old I am. But let's before we get into the meat of things, I love talking about definitions. So let's explain or your definition. How would you describe or define a micro community and a micro influencer?
Sure. So I think that it's most easily kind of determined by scale, right? Like number of followers. And I think that this shifts kind of on a regular basis, but somebody who may or may not be using their content, and whether it's content that they create for, a platform like TikTok, or they live stream on Twitch, or they create content for YouTube, they use it to be a majority of, or they use it to support their income, right? This is a significant portion of their lifestyle, but they don't necessarily have millions of followers, but they do have community. And it's usually when they're very thoughtful with building community and experiences and moments around the things that they care about. And again, whether it's gaming, whether it's fitness, it could be something as, interesting as whiskey aficionados, right? Community can be anywhere, and content creators and micro influencers can be anything. But really, my start came from gaming, so that's kind of where my focus lies. So I think that's kind of it's about scale, it's about scope, and it's also about intent. they've created community around this thing that they care about, and they feel comfortable. They've given people a place to be and to enjoy content that they create. So I think that's kind of more of the fluffy way to look at micro influencers. I know there's probably some influence marketers, who are listening are going, "Oh God, that's the worst explanation ever." But in my experience, like in terms of relation to my experience with micro influencers, they're people who've created spaces that they want people to feel comfortable in and enjoy the same things that they enjoy.
And I think the definition is perfect for this, for the purpose of this conversation, and we'll leave it at that. No worries there, because it fits with the paradigm of, well, the conversation we're trying to lead toward and connect nonprofits to these micro influencers, to these micro communities. So when we first started talking, I was taken back because I thought it was a great channel for nonprofits to reach out to, but it might not be as obvious to other people. So how do you combine, people who are talking about whiskey or games or fitness to a nonprofit's mission? How, where does that touch point happen?
Oh, it can or it can't happen, right? Like I think that it happens either through more often than not, it happens through a personal connection through the nonprofit. So you find the most success, in my opinion, where there's an authentic connection with either the micro influencer themselves or members in that community who've been affected by what the nonprofit service is. So if it's cancer, if they are members of a group who've been affected by natural disaster, if it's people who are looking into research for a certain cure, if it's LGBTQ rights, if it's social justice, those things all tend to resonate with a given group. And that usually drives connection of these micro communities, these communities back to the cause. So there's typically an authentic connection is where you find the most powerful and impactful connections. So it's not as if you could go and just blanket, and I wouldn't recommend it, blanket reach out to all of these communities. You want to send a ton of people messages on Reddit. You don't want to bombard people with emails, because we know that's something that we've done already in the nonprofit sector. We kind of overdo that. We overdo that kind of blanket marketing. This is more a very personal of identifying those folks just by listening to those channels. So in this case, it would be Twitch, it would be YouTube, it would be TikTok. In which case, you can look for those. If you're a nonprofit and you're looking to see who is talking about something adjacent or related to our cause, you can usually search for it pretty easily and find those folks and kind of see their content and genuinely see if they're the people who are connected to the cause.
So you get the group on the left, which is the micro communities. You get the group on the right, which is the nonprofits. In the bridge that binds them is these authentic connections.
Absolutely.
Why would a nonprofit even do this? I mean, those like I said earlier, at first glances, they are quite far apart. And even if you could build an authentic connection, what would be the motivation for a nonprofit to do so?
I think it's a difference between looking for a transaction, looking for the donation, and looking for advocates or like a believer in your cause. I think that the advocate, I think that the believer is more invested. They are going to become donors. They'll probably become fundraisers. They have passion for, the organization or for the cause or for the issues that the nonprofit addresses. They already have a built-in network. There's already probably hundreds, if not thousands, of people connected to this particular network. They are willing to do the work. They might want to volunteer beyond fundraising and donating. And we know that about generationally, there's a level of and a desire for folks to want to do more for a cause that they really care about. And they motivate each other and they kind of propel each other towards, this towards success in supporting the nonprofit. So I think that's those things you get more for a bit more effort into curating these relationships than you would just sending out, a request for donation. It takes more time, but in the end, you have the potential to have a very extended lifetime advocate, if not even if it's a shorter amount of time. I think that the value in creating a loyalty and identification with your brand as a nonprofit has more benefits than you know than any sort of negative.
Let's imagine a nonprofit is listening. They think this is a great idea, but they're obviously not quite sure where to begin, right? The nonprofit mission might be something very specific that they can't necessarily, at least at first glance, see a connection with a community that talks about. I'm going to stick with gaming because that's my
Sure.
close and dear to my heart. As a gaming community, there are a bunch of influencers within that community. What would be a nonprofit's, and I obviously know the answer is going to be, it depends, but what would be some ways to avoid reaching out to these kinds of communities, these kinds of individuals within the community to say, hey, we got this really cool nonprofit you guys might be interested in because of blank, and here's why you should blank and partner with us and so forth. Like, what would be the outreach toward those individuals and communities?
Yeah, well, I think first, if you have the bandwidth to have somebody who's been in the space and adjacent to space, like somebody like me, for instance, we know how to connect and communicate and know the proper channels to do those things. So there are experts in the space. There's not many of us, but we exist. And Alex, I think you know that there's a few of us, and we know how to navigate that space of it, and specific to gaming as well, if that is an interest. But beyond that, I think it goes back to what we were talking about just a moment ago, is when you enter someone's community in this space, if you're there because you genuinely want to connect with this group that you feel would be interested in your nonprofit, I would pump the brakes on the immediate instinct to totally spew out your pitch. You kind of have to take a little bit of time with it. It is building a relationship. Get to know who are these people who are leading the community. Is there opportunity to connect with them? Can you make a request for a short chat to kind of give them a rundown of what you're doing? And be in that space like anyone else would genuinely want to be in that space, because otherwise they're not going to want to engage with you, right? These communities are communities that are built around something that they care about. Not surprisingly, a lot of these communities already have a level of philanthropy and fundraising built in, so it's likely that they have a group of people in the community who do organize fundraising, who do organize volunteer opportunities. And so just be aware of that. Just take some time to review where they are. And a lot of times they exist in places. I'm going to use a term that I'm sure a lot of us know, especially if you have teenage kids, Discord. If you're a gamer, you know about Discord. It's a place where a lot of people exist and they communicate. They're going to be in chat on Twitch. They're going to be in chat, on YouTube. So being there, looking at these folks, engaging with them in that manner is probably a good way to see if there are people you'd want to approach organically and just kind of start those conversations.
I get this imagery that these kind of communities, especially I'm thinking of the gaming community, is kind of like the surfers of the West Coast, where it's its own clique, its own group. And if you're a newbie, if you're a new person coming into the group, you're going to be looked down upon or separated from the group because you're not cool yet. You're not a surfer yet. You're a wannabe surfer, right?
Yeah, I always laugh at and whenever I talk to creators from the space, I always feel like I'm Steve Buscemi in that meme. Hey, cool kids, right? Like he's got the skateboard and the hat and that sort of thing. I always feel that way anyway. But yeah, I think it's helpful if you know that there is a connection to the cause. That goes back to if this group, if the creator or the micro-influencer themselves, or if members in the community have a connection to the cause, then it makes it so much easier to start that conversation. But it has to, and it should be, genuine, just to start that conversation in a very meaningful way. And if there's no interest, then there's no interest, and you do have to accept that. It's better to put your energy elsewhere if that group is not interested. in participating in any sort of efforts to support your cause.
Yeah, my reference was Point Break with Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze.
Oh, I had a feeling that's where you're going.
But the idea is, so someone like yourself can help bridge that gap because you speak the language on both sides of the bridge,
Correct.
to use our analogy. And I like the point of saying, yeah, genuine connections are important, making sure that they're aligned with the cause. And if they're not, it's just okay. Let's move on to something else, find some other space to try. But aside from trying and connecting, what would be some of the benefits that a nonprofit could see by accessing these kinds of communities? You mentioned already certain passions and connectivity, but is there like the end goal obviously is still going to be fundraising and spreading the mission, but is there other kinds of benefits, or maybe you could add more color to those benefits that a nonprofit can really leverage by doing this in the first place?
Right. I think that's something, it could scale out to be some really exciting content that these creators can produce, and they do it. They're already the experts at creating their content, and whenever they typically do a fundraising campaign for a nonprofit, they typically create content around that campaign. So it's going to feature your nonprofit. It's going to feature your impact points and your why. And it's important for you to be there alongside them to help them tell that story. I think that recently American Cancer Society did a really fun collaboration with a game, with a trucking game, like a game where essentially it's you're a big trucker. I'm not even describing it well, but it's a trucking simulation, right? Like you're supposed to drive across country in these giant trucks. That's the game. That's that you just simulate, doing it, being a trucker. But they worked with the game and these creators to create characters and imagery and storytelling, and it all became this beautiful, fun campaign with these creators and influencers and these communities in a very fun, authentic way that also brought in, ideally, a brand to kind of also support and to help, advocate and bring additional, fundraising opportunities into the mix. So just not limited to just fundraising. I think that a lot of these micro communities, these micro influencers or creators, as I continually call them, they also have, opportunities and relationships with brands who are going to like to support their, the people who they support, these creators, in efforts for nonprofits.
When I see an organization, it doesn't really matter what it is, and they are producing something that, at least at first glance, I don't see an alignment with. That they're taking a leap, so to speak, to reach out to a community or to a group that they're not necessarily, again, at first glance, connected to. I sometimes believe that they're not necessarily getting desperate, but that they're moving outside, they're coloring outside their own lines. And I was wondering if you could have any comment towards that because I think it's a great idea. I think, the concept is wonderful. Maybe you have to get past the initial, not resistance, maybe let's call it resistance. I was saying that there is something here. There is actually a connection that we can build. There is something that is connecting to us. It's not just like, I don't know, I'm bad for examples off the top of my head, but some nonprofit that has a completely different mission and topic and focus than a micro community they're trying to reach out to. There is a commonality between them. This isn't we're trying everything and throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks kind of concept. There is something there, but I was wondering if you could speak to that. If that's a concern, and if it is, how do you normally address it in the eyes of the people watching whatever is the outcome of that relationship?
This is a pretty common question, and it's been something that I've seen nonprofits kind of fall into. They get the list, maybe they scrape data from somewhere, and they have a list of all of these creators and these micro influencers, and they have so many followers, and they have this thought, this hunger, like, oh, if only we could just get so and so just to do one fundraiser for us. Oh my gosh, that'd be so wonderful, right? And I caution that because what we're talking about are tactics that are connected back to what should be a part of an overall strategy for your community or your peer-to-peer fundraising, right? And so drawing that line back to, I'll say it again, people probably sick of me saying it. There has to be that level of authenticity. Even if it doesn't seem immediately apparent, it just means that you have to work a little bit longer and probably harder at connecting and building that relationship with that community. So it just takes time. And this is something that I know nonprofits hate to hear. And I've given the advice of you're probably not going to see results on building a community around your fundraising program, your peer-to-peer fundraising program within the first year. It may not be the first couple of years. It may be a while before it starts to take root and becomes a movement, and before it becomes something bigger than you even imagined before. And part of that, honestly, I'm kind of digressing and kind of flowing just a little bit of, I'm just letting it flow out. I'm sorry, Alex. Part of that is letting these communities also take opportunities to be creative, to use their own enthusiasm, to create moments and experiences in their own space. They often need time to digest, what you're trying to accomplish as a nonprofit, in addition to how they create content and interact with each other and interact with their own networks as well. So kind of moving around the question, it's like, I would avoid inauthentic opportunities and outreach unless you have another potential reason to have that conversation with the individual. Because so often, we're on LinkedIn a lot. I know I am. And Alex, I think I see you on there as well. And we get those messages that says, I noticed that you like social justice. You might be interested in doing XYZ. And the instinct is to automate these engagements. The instinct is to automate, this outreach. And in terms of creating community, in terms of having these conversations, you just can't do that. Like that is just not where building these advocates and these advocate groups and these fundraising communities is going to find success.
So the imagery I got as you were talking was, okay, here again, I'm using again the left side, you got the gamers, because I love the gamers, right side, nonprofit. The result of the collaboration, result of this relationship might be, I'm going to say a baby, but it's really the idea that a bit of both, a bit of the gamer side of things, what they offer to the engagement, a bit of the nonprofit, and together it's something that they've created that's a bit of both of them, hence the baby analogy. And that, hopefully when done well, is beautiful because it does have a piece of them in each of it that other people outside of their immediate community on either side of that bridge can relate to. Does that imagery make sense?
I absolutely love that. I always like the idea of you're tending a garden. I've used that analogy too. Like you're growing like a tree nursery, and you're trying to grow this tree together and nurture it together, and you both are responsible for the tree. And I think that groups and communities, they want to have that kind of responsibility. They want to be a part of the story. They want to be. I was talking to a colleague yesterday of why gaming is so engaging. It's because we have agency in gaming. We can be a part of the story, and the mindset is there, especially in the gaming community. They want to be a part of the story. They want to participate. They want to get that achievement. They want to get, they want to level up, and you're there to give them those opportunities, to give them, the carrot to get to the next level. And I think that you're creating something together. And I think this is the scariest part for a lot of nonprofits is they feel like if they give that bit to somebody else, then it's no longer theirs. And in a sense, that's probably true. But the result is a lot of things I said before. It's like the value of a community who is dedicated and loyal and loves your organization and the work you do because you've taken the time to build that relationship with them, to build this program with them. You're going to see a return on investment long after you could even imagine, and probably more impactful lifelong for a lot of these folks, beyond a lot of the programming that I think we spend a lot of time in the nonprofit space.
In the aspect of gaming, there's certain perceptions in certain circles that gaming, especially like first person shooter, FPS gaming, can
Sure.
be and is done by violent people. That, there's a certain tendency, at least towards violence, if you're playing these kinds of games. Is there, I mean, I kind of know the answer to this question already, but what can a nonprofit do? Like, should a nonprofit avoid those kinds of perceptions, saying, look, there's just because there's a stigma around FPS games, let's just avoid any kind of community that has FPS gaming to it. Let's focus on, civilization games or other kinds of passive type of games. But the idea is that, is there any value, any reason, any purpose aside from wanting to build those genuine connections? Is there any value in paying attention to those kinds of stigmas because it might end up backfiring at some point down the line? Or is it like, listen, you guys have no idea. These are usually awesome people, the kindest people. How do you navigate basically the map, the battlefield of these communities, keeping in line your mission and maybe not falling victim to your own preconceived notions about what these communities are about?
Yeah, excellent question, and one that I've definitely have heard and have answered before. So I'll first say, and I mentioned this earlier, a lot of times content is created specifically for your fundraising efforts. So while a community may be playing a lot of Call of Duty or Fortnite, or they might be playing a very scary, potentially graphic horror game, like all those things I've seen before. They often create special content specifically for their fundraising efforts, for your organization. That's not unusual at all. And a part of this is ideally you're having some level of contact with these folks, and you help set that expectation and that precedent if this is a concern. A lot of organizations are like, these are creators, they're going to create their own content. We can't really control that. At the end of the day, so as long as we make sure that they cover the points of impact, we know that they'll talk to their community accordingly. Or conversely, saying like, hey, we love what you do, but we'd appreciate maybe no mature rated games during this particular stream. And in most cases, people who care about your nonprofit and your cause, those communities are going to go, totally, we get it, we understand. That's fantastic. Let's do something else. We already plan on doing something else. Is probably going to be the response, especially if it's I see this more often than not when it comes to organizations that have to do with like that deal with a lot with like with young people, or that are more focused on youth issues. But I think that's the two situations. This is why it's important to talk to people to create those relationships. Again, it takes a little bit more time, it takes effort, it takes staffing, and I know all those things will make nonprofits cringe to say like, oh, we don't have the time. But if you take just a little bit of time to have that genuine touch point, it goes a long way.
Let's take the side of the micro influencer in these communities. What would be their motivation to even work with a nonprofit, right? Let's say the nonprofit approaches me. I'm the gamer, the popular gamer these days in whatever game is popular these days. It's been a while since I played. But what would be my motivation to say, yeah, I get what you're trying to do here, Mr. or Mrs. Nonprofit, but what's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this relationship that would make it worth my time, effort to do and to be involved in?
Oh, wow. Asking the hard questions, Alex, I see. I think more often than not, the influencer will want to see some level. They may not ask for this, but there's a sense they want some sort of recognition, and being recognized in like official capacities by the nonprofit is very helpful. And it could be a matter of on their social channels, in addition to, of course, like probably the countless newsletters and messaging that goes out, to identify them as somebody who's a supporter for the organization, much like they would with other celebrities, if it makes sense. And so, if you think about influencers, micro influencers, creators, content creators, use those words somewhat interchangeably. they are their own business, right? So if you think about these folks in the light of how would you partner with a brand, think about those the same way. Think about that the same way. You'd give them sometimes, depending on who they are, the same level of attention. Bare minimum is like official recognition on a brand channel, on your channels of communication, and beyond that. Uh, Again, it goes back to why it's important to have like that authentic connection, with the cause. If typically that's usually the driver for the fundraising, but beyond that is talking about all the good work that the community is doing for your nonprofit.
So recognition means awards,
It
my name
can.
published. Like I'm curious to more specifically. Just curious, yeah, if you give us some examples.
Yeah, I mean, it can be like an official award. It can also just genuinely be thank you to X creator for doing this work. We appreciate the work that you've done and doing it like consistently, like through the length of the campaign of like following what they're doing, talking to your own audiences about what's happening. Doing that consistently feels like it's not a transactional moment and that you're trying to elevate them within your own community of supporters to show that there's so many different ways to support your nonprofit. Here's just another one. Here's another way that people are supporting it, and this person is doing it the best. And so that's the kind of social recognition which I think goes the furthest. While having like a cool plaque or swag, all of that, as a nonprofit, we do that anyway. Like that's fine. That's typically not expected from people who support a nonprofit in these spaces, but they do like to be recognized, and I think that's important.
And I guess I'm kind of extrapolating. This is obviously an ongoing relationship. Like, let's say, hypothetically, as a nonprofit, you've established this relationship with one or multiple communities. Like, what do you need to do on, I guess, on either side of that bridge to sustain that relationship so that it can be meaningful long term?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like you would with, I mean, any relationship, you have to have communication that feels like it. If you have like a relationship manager, type person who is talking to your other, top partners, it's not that different. It's not that different to maintain those relationships because you're not necessarily talking to hundreds or thousands of community members. I guess that's maybe something also to pull apart. You're probably talking to the micro influencer themselves or community manager in that community who's managing these campaigns. Those are the people who you put them in your contact book and you're like, hey, we have an annual or biannual event and we want you to be involved with it in some capacity, and this is how you can help. And then throughout the year you have touch points, and if you do it well, you're also reciprocating and you're paying attention to the content that they're doing, and you support it beyond that ask for fundraising. And this is the tricky part of saying, we see you doing cool stuff. Congratulations on getting that. You had a big win there. You got a good brand sponsorship. Congrats, right? You're building that relationship because you want it to be authentic. You want them to come back and say, hey, so and so at X nonprofit really cares about the work we do, and in turn, we care about the work we do for that nonprofit. But again, I think it needs to be a genuine connection, and you may not be able to do these exact things for every single community leader or content creator that you approach, but you should at least attempt it. You should try to create these connections with people, for a more sustainable fundraising program and support for your organization.
A lot of this conversation reminds me of, and I don't know how many years ago now because everything has been in a time warp because of the COVID. But at one point, a lot of really big popular brands stopped, or at least I had the perception that they stopped or reduced their level of engagement with certain large scale influencers. And then at some point, organizations realize that they can tap into these smaller influencers. And we're talking about still brand influencers, ambassadors, but have those who are on Instagram and all these other channels that have more in the low thousands type of followers versus the ones that are paid, crazy amounts of money because they have millions of followers. And there was a period of time when these brands, and we're talking about more on the for-profit side at this point, but there was more where I had the perception, at least, that this became really popular. Find those micro influencers because they require less in terms of engagement, but their communities are very passionate. They are intense. They follow these influencers heavily, and that's like the hot thing. And this kind of sounds like everything we've been talking about so far sounds similar. It's just in a different venue. It's more like you said, the content creators, the YouTubers, the Twitchers, and the Reddits, and the gamers who are maybe not as socially prevalent as some of the other, Instagram type models, type stuff like that. But sure. It sounds like there's a lot more parallels than there are differences. Would you agree with that? Like, what would you say then? If you did, help me round up the question. If you did say they're similar, in what ways are they different? Like, how are these influencers, these micro influencers in these communities different than the ones that I mentioned about Instagram and those kinds of influencers?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes. So the answer is yes. I think it's a similar approach to creating connection and creating activations around smaller communities. I think that the difference here is that from my point of view, these micro influencers are they've mindfully created community around their brand. And that is kind of the key conversation there. They care about the people in their community more often than not, as opposed to an up and coming creator. It's kind of like the other side that you've spoken to. They may have less of a community and more of an audience. And so while they may do fundraising, they might have some success there, they may not be creating the advocates that you see whenever you're engaging, micro influencers who have community, who've built community with, who are open and warm to this idea of supporting a nonprofit and fundraising, or volunteerism or advocacy. So I think that's the distinction I would probably draw the most clear between the two. I think both have value, but I think one, they have their purpose. And I think in terms of building peer-to-peer fundraising or community fundraising programming, the former is the better one, where you're actually engaging with pre-existing networks of people who can motivate and activate, something we're more familiar with in the nonprofit realm of finding people with networks who are going to support your cause, versus let's just give it to this this micro influencer, this influencer, and let them have a campaign, and they'll talk about X cause for a period of time, and they'll raise this much money. For me, it's about how long is the tail and what is the significance? Does it have substance beyond the moment for the fundraising? And typically it's those smaller communities, those smaller quote unquote creators, that they tend to have a more long lasting impact and create those, those advocates, those believers of your organization. And that has more value in the long run.
So looking forward into the future, I was wondering if you had any insight on these kinds of relationships in the longer term. Like, is there a sense that this is just a trend we're in the middle of? It's been around for a couple of years. It might be around for a couple more, but it's probably going to dissipate at some point. Or do you see this as, this is not going anywhere, this is here for the long term, and here's why?
I think that there's going to be people in a digital space coming together around things that they care about. And it could be, in this case, we were talking a lot about gaming today. There's always going to be those groups. And those groups have been around forever. Like, as long as there was a place for nerds like me to get together and talk about games, we've been getting together to talk about them and to play them and to be with each other and doing that. Other content is created, and other groups like that, with that same passion around those passion interests, they exist. They exist all over the place. And so those are communities. Those people come together on a daily basis in virtual space to connect, to see their friends, and to see what the other people are up to. They could be sharing recipes. They could be talking about the show that they watched last night. It's the classic water cooler talk at work, but we're not having those conversations as often at work. We're having it with other people that we know online in these virtual spaces. And I don't see that necessarily going anywhere anytime soon, especially of how we've had to exist over the last three or 4 years, is that we found a lot of power in connecting with each other in a digital space, on virtual platforms. I don't think that's going anywhere. So I think it's wise for an organization to say people are in these communities together for a reason already, and they probably have a connection to something that may be related to our cause and what our nonprofit, the issues that our nonprofit may address. So I think it's wise to invest some time into these spaces. And again, like I said, we're talking a lot about gaming, but there's communities for all sorts of things. And I think that they all have value in connecting with and just to start these conversations. That may look different, right? Like the engagement might look different from one group to the next, but the intent is all the same, is having genuine, authentic conversations and making sure that the connection to the cause has meaning and is potentially create these very long-lasting relationships.
Awesome. I'm happy to hear that. And on that note, I was wondering if you could share with people, because you mentioned there's only so few people like yourself who are able to be experts in that bridge building, type of activity. If you could share some of your online ways that people connect with you online.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn at Lou Adducci. I'm also known on Twitter and other platforms as Hero by Clicking. I started a blog one day, Alex, because I wanted to change the world like we did, in the early 2000s. I was going to write a blog and change the world, and I thought it'd be cute that we can all be a hero by clicking the button to volunteer, to donate, that sort of thing. So that name became synonymous with a lot of the work that I got to do. So it's a little cheesy, but I can't get rid of it because I love it. Hero by Clicking, or Lou Adducci on LinkedIn. You should be able to find me very easily.
Is that your gamer tag as well?
It is. It's pretty much everywhere.
That's cool. It's better than mine. Mine was Frosty the Hitman.
That's still pretty cool.
I'm Canadian, Frosty the Snowman. Only I was doing a lot of FPS type games, so I was the Hitman. Yeah.
That's fun. That's a lot of fun.
Cool. Lou, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful day.
All right, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.